It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life. From the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators. The famous and not so famous. The controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here is Douglas Coleman.
Howdy, 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 howdy. Ho, 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 hee, 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 ha. Welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, Douglas Coleman. How are you? Thank you for joining us. Nice to have you with us as always. We have an author's showcase today. We've got two authors up. First one up is Carey Azzara. Carey is from the Boston area, and he's written a new book called Caitlin's Mooring, which he will tell us a bit about, along with some other things that we get into. He also has some short stories out and a technical manual on marketing research practices. He will be up first, followed by Rebecca Schaper. And Rebecca is also an author, a filmmaker, philanthropist, and mental health advocate. She has got a book out called The Light in His Soul, Lessons from My Brother's Schizophrenia. And we get into a nice conversation about mental health and about her brother. She will be up in the second half of the show. Before we get to them, we've got one track to play. This was a new submission from Music X-Ray. Thank you to everybody who's been submitting on Music X-Ray. Really appreciate it. The track is called First Time by the Comobrosband, C-O-M-O-B-R-O-S band. And we'll get to that in just a second. One footnote on Rebecca's interview. Normally I don't like to comment on an interview that nobody's heard yet. However, I will in this case. At the end of the interview, I got stuck on a word that I was looking for to try to make a comparison between schizophrenia and people that have special powers of their mind. The word I was looking for was clairvoyant. And the light went on right as we were editing the interview. So when you get to that point in the interview, fill in the blank with the word clairvoyant. And just to be accurate, I looked up the word in the dictionary and it was exactly the word I was looking for. A person who claims to have supernatural ability to perceive events in the future or beyond normal sensory contact. So, with that, here is First Time by the Como Brothers Band.
I'm looking at you for the first time. Everything is frozen like a moonlit night. I'm looking at you for the first time. No, I'll always love you as I hold you tight. When you fall, if you break, I'll be there and I'll pick you up. Take my hand and I'll wait with you forever. Feeling you breathing, my heart beating faster. Time stood still and you're all that matters. And I never wanna leave. I'll always love you like the first time. I'll always love you like the first time. Looking at you for the first time. Everything is greener like a spring-lit night. I'm looking at you for the first time. I didn't know a love could ever burn so bright. When you fall, if you break, I'll be there and I'll pick you up. Take my hand and I'll wait with you forever. Feeling you breathe, my heart beating faster. Time stood still and you're all that matters. And I never wanna leave. I'll always love you like the first time. I'll always love you like the first time. I'll always love you like the first time. I held you in my heart. You held a piece of me. I've loved you from the start. No, faster. Time stood still and you're all that matters. And I never wanna leave. I'll always love you like the first time. Eyes filled with water, heart filled with laughter. My world has changed forever after. And I hope that you can see. I'll always love you like the first time. 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 Like the first time.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Carey Azzara. Hi, Carey. How are you?
I'm well, Douglas. It's nice to be with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. Let's see. You are an author. You're from the Boston area. Actually, I grew up in the Boston area, lived there most of my life. I moved in 2005 to Las Vegas, just got tired of New England winter. But I do miss that area. Boston is so much nicer of a city, I think, in terms of the culture and the history. Las Vegas is, I mean, I like it, but it's not quite the same thing. You know?
No, I can understand.
I think you know where I'm coming from. It's just, there's no community in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
It's just really tourists and, you know, and then if you get out of the city, you're just in the middle of the desert. So
although it is very pretty. I've been to the desert around Las Vegas, and it is quite beautiful. Actually, there are some nice spots.
Oh, absolutely. The desert is its own type of beauty, but I don't know. I think I'm just one of these people who likes trees. You know.
Yeah, I'm partial to trees too.
I'm kind of into trees. You know.
Yeah. Did you know that one full-grown tree of undetermined, species, it produces enough oxygen for two people?
Oh, I didn't know that, but that's very interesting.
Yeah, and so I feel very fortunate because our home is surrounded by trees, and so I get a lot of oxygen whenever I walk out on my deck.
Well, so there should be no oxygen in the desert then, right?
Well, I don't think it quite works that way because there is, winds do bring, circulate the air, the atmosphere around the earth. So it doesn't quite work the way I'm describing. It's not like the oxygen just sits right where you are, but it's a general concept.
It does move around, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Some of the New England oxygen gets to you eventually.
Well, that's good to know. That's good.
It takes a while because it's got to go all the way around the earth, but it gets there.
So you've got a new book out called Caitlin's Mooring, which we'll get to in a second. You've also written collections of short stories. And tell us about the Uncommon Heroes and Cars. Tell us about that.
Well, that was actually the first publication of fiction. I've written a lot of things, mostly technical, throughout my career. And when I decided to retire, I was also cutting back on the number of cars I owned. I used to play around with fixing up various cars and then not necessarily for sale, but to play with, to run around in. And some of them were British roadsters and so forth, of different types. And anyway, I had heard that if you write a story about the item that you're putting on eBay, it brings more people to the post, and so I decided to try that. Since I had a couple of cars that I was auctioning off, and it worked. It worked pretty well. I wrote stories, not necessarily histories of the car or anything like that, but just tall tales about that car. I made up a tale about the car, and the post said that if you buy the car, you get the rights to the story. You own it. So I did sell a couple of cars. I'm not sure if the story made the difference or not, but I know I got a lot more eyeballs than I would have otherwise. eventually, I built up a series of stories. My daughter said, "You should put those into into a book, Dad. Make a collection." And at first, I kind of poo-pooed the idea, but eventually, I decided why not, and so that's how it happened.
Well, how long were these stories that you wrote about the cars?
Well, they were very short. I mean, and which is in itself challenging. I try, but I needed to keep them short. I think it was you that offline you mentioned that attention spans are short, and you're right. But I was hoping that maybe you came for the car, but then you stayed for the story, and if you stayed, maybe you were willing to read a little bit. And eventually, when I published those stories, I added to them, I lengthened them, I put more dialogue in and that sort of thing. So enhanced the kernel that I had created for the eBay post.
So how many cars did you sell on eBay?
Well, there were 3 cars that I was hoping to sell at that point. 2 of my own and one for my parents, actually. And they eventually they all sold, but only 2 of them really sold through eBay. The other, my parents' car actually was sold privately through a different channel, so to speak.
What kind of cars were these?
Well, there was a Mark 7. I think it was Mark 7 Lincoln. Was one of them. That was my mom and dad's car. I had an Austin Healey, 1965, and a Jaguar, a Roadster.
The XKE, that long hooded 12-cylinder thing?
Yes, well, actually, I had two Jaguars. The one I sold on eBay was a 12-cylinder Roadster with a hardtop, and later after that, I did buy an XKE and owned that for quite a long time. I don't have it in the garage anymore, but that was a heck of a car. I really enjoyed driving that car around, I'll tell you. Talk about feeling like you're driving on rails. That thing really took a corner.
Well, I had a friend a long time ago who had one of those 12-cylinder Jaguars where it was, all hood and just a 2-seater, right? And when the thing ran good, it ran unbelievable. But he said he was his own mechanic. And he said that keeping all 6 carburetors tuned was a real pain in the ass.
Yes, to put it lightly. And then when you had to change the spark plugs, all 12 of them, that was a major undertaking. And everything had to be, tuned just right. And so I always thought of those cars as like the girl with the curl, When she was good, she was really good. When she was bad, she was really awful.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you on that. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was you wrote a technical manual on marketing research practices. Tell me a little about that.
Well, that predates my authorship, of books of fiction. My career and my training was in market research and social sciences, and at one point I made the decision to try to take what I had learned over a number of years and put that into a text to help other researchers who were doing market research for business purposes, so that they could cut through some of the academic stuff and get down to some basic principles and help them be better at structuring questionnaires. I had found that people who thought they could write a questionnaire were very wrong. They just had no idea what to do, and some of the ins and outs. So I felt like it was I hoped that it would give me some panache, but also actually be of value to the profession. Can
you give me an example of one of the questions?
Well, off the top of my head, no. It was probably not. That was back in 2010. But but there are various ways to ask questions, and how you ask a question will in fact determine how things are answered. I mean, there's things called questionnaire, question bias. And you can create bias by how you ask the question. And I wanted to make people aware of things like that, and then give them examples of how best to approach it. And part of the book actually was, which I thought was one of the interesting things, was I kind of put people through a quiz, and I gave them a lot of examples after they had read the text, and I gave them a lot of examples of, well, what's wrong with this, and then they had to go and figure out, based on what they had read, why that question was improperly written or could be improved. And then I also gave them my version of how I would have asked the question.
Oh, I see. Okay. The other one on here, I'm kind of jumping around, but the other one on here is called The Lottery Curse.
Yes.
Tell us about that. I have this idea in my head of what it is, but tell me what it is.
Well, I was talking to an audience recently. We had a book launch for Caitlin's Mooring last Saturday, and so I referred to my working on that book as my dark period. I had encountered the fact that when people win the lottery, it doesn't always work out very well for them. In fact, there's some statistics out there, one of which suggests that upward of 70% of the people who win the lottery end up worse off than they were financially, not just emotionally and so forth, financially after about 4 or 5 years. And I was very intrigued by that. So I decided to do some more research. I found that that was in fact seemed borne out by the examples I found of people having problems, and then what those problems were. So a lot of those stories are I won't say they're all fictional. There's 3 stories in that novel, and they all tell a tale of the kinds of problems, the kinds of troubles that folks who win these big windfalls of cash find themselves, facing. So I took some of the things that were in the newsreels and integrated them into the story. So hopefully they have, some level of authenticity because of that. But then I clearly, took poetic license and created scenarios that were very likely to have happened, but they weren't actual events.
I assume you're talking about somebody who wins a huge, like millions of dollar lottery.
Yes, yeah. We're absolutely. We're talking about mega bucks. We're talking about somebody who wins $100 million, or even $50 million. Just extraordinarily large amounts that are life changing, and then depending on what was often the case is that whatever personality, attributes you could attribute to someone, those attributes sometimes just became exaggerated by having so much cash and all of a sudden feeling, the freedom of the financial freedom. But it turns out that it wasn't freedom in the sense that they were happier. They often got themselves in quite a bit of trouble.
Yeah, I was just thinking that somebody who all of a sudden gets that kind of money and they don't have financial discipline conceivably could spend it all and be back to zero. But I don't think that's exactly what you're talking about in your book, right?
Yeah. It's not so much that they end up spending it all, because it takes even if you're spending money like it's water. When you have $100 million in your pocket and you're used to just a W-2 paycheck, it's hard to spend it all. But what happens is that they make foolish investments. They are hounded by everybody who ever knew them for loans and investment opportunities, and then they go they go off the rails. It's very common for people to have alcohol and drug problems. And some of my characters had that as well, but that wasn't always it's not always a theme, but it's a very prominent one in the stories of actual people, who have won the lottery, or a lottery, there are a bunch of them. So for example, one story, is a couple who wins the lottery, and over the course of time, they go apart, they say. And so the story becomes, a large part of the story takes place in a courtroom. And I won't give more than that away, but Somebody goes overboard at sea. One of the gentlemen in this couple is a good sailor, and they're all sailing, and his wife ends up in the water.
All right. Well, that sounds like an interesting story. I'm guessing that she went overboard without a life jacket.
As it turns out, you're right.
Let's talk about your new book. It's called Caitlin's Mooring, now that we're on a nautical theme. And tell us a little bit about that story, if you would, please.
Sure. Well, the nautical theme is because we're a family of sailors. My dad sailed. My mom and dad sailed. I've sailed. My two sons are sailors. My daughter is actually a pretty decent sailor and is a marine biologist and she has a PhD in marine biology, and she's been on the water a lot. So it's not hard for me to bring some of that into the storytelling. Caitlin's Mooring is about a young woman, Caitlin, who faces some serious challenges right from the beginning of the book. She is, attending Boston University, which is only down the road from me, and but her family lives in Maine. And when she gets a call from her grandfather, she gets on the train and goes right back to Owl's Head, Maine, which is on the coast by Rockland, pretty far up. And the story evolves from there. It spans 5 generations of this family and the challenges they face and how they overcome those challenges, and actually grow, as people through that process. So in the beginning, clearly Caitlin is the focal point, and as the book progresses, you are introduced to other characters, and then toward the end, her son becomes more of a focal point in terms of the main character. So it kind of shifts. I'm not sure if I'm telling you what you want to know or not, but I'm always reluctant to give too much away because I don't want to spoil it for anyone,
Oh, absolutely. You want people to buy the book. One of the things that I thought was interesting when you're talking about nautical and boats and sailing and things, having grown up in New England, I think anyone who grew up in New England would be hard-pressed not to at least have known someone who had a boat.
You're probably correct, yeah.
Because where I grew up was in Hull, Massachusetts, and we didn't have a boat, actually, but everyone I knew did. And
well, that's handy.
Yeah, because that's a beach town, and we used to go out with the lobster guys and just hang out with them and watch them bring in their pots, and it was great fun out there. And I can remember when they would come back, with the boat full of lobsters, they would give us like one of those big Glad trash bags full, and they would just count them and say, okay, $1 a piece for these like 1.5 pound lobsters. And we'd have maybe 20 of them, give them $20 and 20 lobsters. And we could go down the beach. This is when they allowed you to make fires on the beach. I don't think you can do that anymore.
No, I don't think so.
And a big pot of salt water and just cook the lobsters and sit there and eat them. And well, that was a very romantic memory of my childhood.
Yeah, and that's some good eats right there. I'll tell you that's especially right on the beach. When they're fresh out of the water. It doesn't get any better than that.
Oh, it was wonderful. Yeah. So, where is this book available? The book is out now, I assume, right?
Yes. Well, the publisher and I made a decision to publish the book in hard copy and Kindle. And it is out. It's available online at both Barnes & Noble and Amazon, as well as through the publisher's website. And then we will be releasing the paperback version probably in October.
All right, super. Do you have a website you want to promote?
I don't have I have a landing page, but I'm not particularly proud of it, to be quite frank with everyone. So if you want to learn more about me, I recommend just going to my author page on Amazon. That'd probably be the easiest thing to do, and then the books are right there. And but I also would invite people to check out my Facebook page I'm also a very active user on LinkedIn, so you'll find me there, playing around a lot. That probably would do it.
Okay. Well, we got to wrap this up. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it. Nice talking to you.
My pleasure.
Nice talking to a fellow New Englander. And,
yes, indeed. And I really enjoyed talking with you.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Tired of living in a culture of lies, fake news, and alternative facts? The Pro-Truth Pledge reverses the tide of lies by calling on politicians, and everyone else, to commit to truth-oriented behaviors. The pledge asks signees to commit to 12 behaviors that research in behavioral science shows lead to truthfulness, such as clarifying one's opinions and the facts, citing one's sources, and celebrating people who update their beliefs toward the truth. Private citizens who sign the pledge get the benefit of contributing to a more truth-oriented society. Public figures get more substantive rewards for signing the pledge in the form of positive media and public recognition. The pledge crowdsources the truth by asking volunteers to evaluate the statements of public figures who sign the pledge. Take the pledge, demand that your elected representatives do so, and encourage your friends to take it at protruthpledge.org.
After the loss of my dog Mandy, I had difficulty sleeping. She had been my best friend for years. She slept on the end of my bed, and I found her snoring soothing. It was difficult for me, as I also found little support for my grief. Not being able to sleep was the worst. I decided to create an audiobook to help people like me. Listen to my voice as you drift into a peaceful sleep, taking a journey using your dog's memories, accompanied by rain falling, birds singing, and a waterfall. To get your download, go to Amazon and search Relax by Jane Yates. Thanks to Douglas Coleman for this spot.
Hi there, this is Stuart Epps from the UK, record producer, engineer. You might have heard of me. I've worked with artists from Elton John to Led Zeppelin to Bad Company, Twisted Sister, Robbie Williams, Oasis, many, many great bands and artists in the past and the present and hopefully in the future. But you can work with me as well. All you got to do is get in touch with me on eppsmusicproductions.com. That's EPPSproductionsmusic.com. And I can help you with your productions and with your recordings. A lot of people do home recordings now, which you can only take so far. Maybe they need a bit of professional help. So get in touch with me and we can sort it out. And thanks for Douglas Coleman for giving me the spot. Thanks a lot. Cheers, bye.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
And now...
Hey, Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat.
Again?
Nothing up my sleeve. Presto! No doubt about it. I gotta get another hat.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Rebecca Schaper. Hi, Rebecca. How are you?
fine, Doug. How are you? Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm looking forward to talking to you.
Oh, well, you're very welcome. Thank you for coming on the show. I detect a slight Southern accent. Are you originally from the South?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I was born in Atlanta and lived in Greenville, South Carolina most of my life, and I have moved in different areas, but my accent was a lot worse than this, so I've kind of polished it up a little bit.
Are you still in Atlanta?
Yes, still in Atlanta.
Okay. All right. See, I never know where people are from or where they are when I call them, so you could be anywhere, but yeah, a little bit. I'm originally from Boston, and maybe you pick up a little Boston accent, but I haven't lived there since 2005. So some people say I've lost it. Some people say I haven't. So I don't know.
Well, I have to be one of those that said I don't feel it. I don't feel the Boston accent. I think they're a lot stronger, but yours is very nice. I like it.
No, thank you. If you go to certain areas in Boston, it's, oh my God. I mean, it's unbelievable, the stronger the accent. But anyways, so you are an author and a filmmaker and a mental health advocate. Before we get to your story, there was one thing kind of interesting on your bio that I wanted to bring up, sort of unusual, was that it appears that your film came out before the book. Is that correct?
You are correct.
Okay, because that's unusual. Usually the book comes out first and then it's turned into a film. How did the film come first?
Well, to tell you the truth, it was a soul calling. After finding my brother, who was missing for 20 years, he took off in 1977, and through a miracle, we found him in 1997. Actually,
Wow.
we were reunited. It was actually through a true miracle how we found each other. And I always felt like he was alive. So I decided to actually just do a story about him by taking photographs. But something deep within me kept nagging me to do a documentary. And Doug, honestly, I had no clue how to do a documentary. I had no clue, but I just had this strong sense that this is what I had to do. So when Carl and I reunited, I saw his soul and not his disease. And I think that was the driving force. He was actually the initiator of healing the wounds in my family when I was growing up. And I'll preface that a little bit. I grew up in a family with all kinds of addiction. Both parents died by suicide. Oh. My mother was paranoid schizophrenia. There was sexual abuse by my father, and then we found out later in the film that he abused my daughter. There was alcoholism. So I truly believe my brother, when we reunited, it was like, it was a powerful underlying subconscious bond we had. And it was like we knew each other. We knew that we came and met and found each other for a reason, but it was sort of an unspoken reason. And I do believe with that driving force within me that I had within my soul that I had to do this documentary. Not only was he the initiator of healing the wounds, but we broke the cycle as well. So if we had not found each other, the film never would have come to fruition, or the book. And it's to help others through challenges that they're going through. We are given a chance to rewrite the story of our lives. And when a major life event throws us off course, it is a gift. And I truly believe people should unwrap it and use it to create a brilliant new life in order to help themselves and others.
Now, how old was your brother when he left?
He had probably a semester in college, and that's usually about the time when it's a very significant traumatic experience in their life, or circumstances that they can't actually handle or take on responsibility.
So he
was probably 21. Yeah.
About 21. Okay. Was there something that happened that made him to go? You mentioned that there was a lot of abuse in your family. Was it something like that? Was he still living at home at the time that he took off?
No, he was in college, and he had one more semester. I think it was probably being in college, feeling like that he was failing, knew that something was not right about him. He felt different. But I truly believe individuals, even people with autism, and I feel that they are very sensitive people, very, very sensitive people. And I truly believe he just couldn't take it anymore and took off. And he traveled probably almost all 49 states on trains.
How did he support himself for 20 years?
He would, from when I found him, he would get odd jobs in places. Salvation Army. He lived on the roads a lot. And I asked him, I said, Carl, did you ever steal? And he said, no. He said, I had too much pride. And he was a very loving, very wise individual, brilliant. But he passed away 2012 of colon cancer.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. So he basically just lived on his wits for 20 years, did what he had to do to eat and find a place to sleep. And wow, that's amazing. What I find interesting about that is that if you look at that from the perspective of he couldn't handle college, but he could do that, where most people could stay in college and finish and get a job. But the idea of just taking off and living on your wits would be impossible for a lot of people. So when you mention the idea that the autism and people with certain mental conditions are special, it is true, because they can do things that other people just wouldn't do. Do you understand what I mean? Yeah.
I totally, yes. And that's what I saw in him when we reunited, Doug, is I knew there was something about him, but I didn't really realize it until I started the book, which I didn't know anything about writing as well. And I found an amazing ghostwriter. And that's when everything unfolded. So I know I did things backwards, but that's part of my personality anyway. And I sort of like to phrase it that the documentary is the foundation and the book is the transformation. And the book, it explains a lot of how our entire family healed. And the documentary is the spine of the book.
Okay. Yeah, because usually the book goes into a lot more detail. Anybody who's read a book that's become a film, typically that's the first response, is they say, oh, well, the book is much more detailed. The characters get developed much more than in the film, because the film has to be condensed into an hour and a half or 2 hours. But the book can go on forever. So yes. Typically that's what happens. But it's interesting that you did it that way. So the documentary is the overview, and then you get the book for all the details, I suppose.
Yeah, and honestly, I didn't know it was going to come to fruition. Again, we screened. My brother came with me when we screened at film festivals. People loved him. He said the truth, and it was very short but wise. And when he had enough, and he would walk out. He loved people, and people were drawn to him. But after 2012, everything was done. We had screened. We did screened organizations. We had helped a lot of people, which was the purpose of the film. Then that was it for me. And I don't want to sound strange when I say this, but I do believe my brother was speaking to me again, because 3 years later, 2015, is when I had that other deep, deep, strong urge to write a book. And I had just journaled a little bit after he had passed away. And through serendipity, I found an amazing ghostwriter, and one thing led to another, and people have walked in my lives to make the film and the book to be completed. And so I just feel very blessed for that. I know it's my purpose.
You mentioned the term ghostwriter. I assume that's Gerald Everett Jones?
Yes.
What does a ghostwriter actually do?
Well, I had written a lot of my thoughts down, and I sent them to him. He looked at the documentary, and he weaved the documentary, my journal, together, and then he would give me my thoughts. I'd give him his thoughts of where my vision was for the book, and he just knew. He just knew what to write. It was incredible. It was like we were in sync with each other.
Okay, so he kind of organized your thoughts into something tangible.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
I had the vision, and I wrote my thoughts down, but he put it all together, and I think he's into his 8th novel now.
And the reason he's called a ghost is why?
I don't know. That's just how it's phrased.
Well, because I've heard that term many times, and I never quite understood why they were called a ghost.
And unbeknownst to me, when I hired him, I didn't know that he lived 5 minutes from where my daughter lives in California.
Oh,
how bizarre is that?
Yeah. I always thought that they were called a ghost because they didn't get credit, but
I gave him lots of credit.
You gave him
I said,
lots of credit.
Gerald,
so,
your name's getting on the front of this book. I'd prefer my name being even smaller. He was amazing. I just loved working with him.
There's one word here that I think it needs a definition, and it's probably not going to be an easy question or an easy answer. But can you define schizophrenia?
Wow, that's a loaded question.
Yeah, I know it's tough, but maybe give us an example of your brother's particular schizophrenia.
Okay. He heard voices. He isolated himself. He would... It was hard for him to socialize with people a lot until he trusted them. His hygiene was not that good. But beyond that, once he got on some type of medication, he seemed well at that point. But sometimes I felt like the medication hindered his personality. Honestly, that's a very loaded question. Like I say, I can just speak for my brother, and I feel like they're very gifted individuals. I think they're very sensitive. They pick up on other people. I remember him talking about he would always sit back and observe and watch. And he even in the film, I can give you this example, and it may not totally relate with what your question is, but in the film, when we were interviewing him, he spoke that he heard a voice come over him saying, "I'm going to have to take your mother." And 2 weeks later, my mother died by suicide. And he never told me until we were interviewing him. And he said, "I feel guilty for not telling Rebecca that."
Wow.
Yeah.
No, I didn't mean it to be a loaded question. Loaded question usually sounds like a bad thing. I was just trying to get an idea of it because it is a clinical term. Doctors do label people as schizophrenics. Mm-hmm. But exactly what it is, I don't know. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm probably not qualified, but I do have an opinion. And it's difficult to determine, at least from my perspective, somebody to say, oh, well, he's a schizophrenic, as opposed to just somebody who is antisocial. I mean, do you have to have certain characteristics to qualify as a schizophrenic. And so asking you for examples of your brother gives me a better idea of what exactly it is. Now, when you said the medication, I found that interesting because people who take medication for all kinds of things, and particularly people who self-medicate with alcohol and marijuana and things and depressants and things like that, that's what happens a lot, is that it destroys their personality because they just become kind of like a vegetable, you know. Did you think that happened with your brother did he take, like Zoloft and?
Well, while he was on the road, he was an alcoholic, and so was my mother, and it just masks their feelings. They're trying to survive, because they can't cope with what's going on within side of themselves, of all the chaos, anxiety, and the voices. So they mask it. So now fast forward with the medication, he was on Haldol. That flattened him out completely, and I fought for that because I did not want him on Haldol. I have known people with schizophrenia who do not have to be on medication. They have been able to manage themselves without medication. My brother, he had to be on medication. You have to find the right cocktail that works for them. And also, too, sometimes they quit because they think they feel better, and then they go off of it, and then he plummets. But it's sort of a vicious cycle, but we don't know enough about it. I know there's a lot of research that's going on right now, and I do believe the medical field is opening up more and more to learn more about this type of illness. That we can learn from them, to be quite honest, and people with autism and other altered type minds. You understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote this book too. I'm just so passionate about that. And I could be in my grave, and by the time maybe it will be a breakthrough, the stigma. Because you think of Mozart, Van Gogh. They were, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. There was the movie Rain Man. Did you see that movie?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. So it's like, why can't we take a step back and say, okay, let's treat this not so much with medication. Let's see if we can treat it in a different perspective. It would take a really patient therapist or psychologist to be able to do that. But I just think there's a way.
Was your brother, did he have any violent tendencies?
No. No.
Self-abusing, it sounds like, rather than lashing out at other people. Yeah.
I'm sorry? What'd you say?
I said he sounded more self-abusing than lashing out at other people.
Yes. And he quit drinking cold turkey once we found each other. But I'm telling you, Doug, he had such a presence, he looked like Santa Claus. And people just felt so comfortable around him. It's hard to explain to people unless you experience it. And I speak through my experience and what I saw in him. He had a beautiful soul, and I think a lot of people are being so judged and misunderstood.
It's interesting that you said that he actually had the premonition that your mother was going to die.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that's amazing. And I've had a similar experience with my father. I'll just tell you real quick. My father died of cancer, and when he died, my mother shortly after rented out the house and moved away because it was too painful for her, I guess, to stay in that house. So she rented it out to a stranger. And this was a long time ago, before email and internet. And she gets a letter from the woman who was renting the house and said, "You're going to think I'm nuts, but I got up last night at 3:00 in the morning and there was a man standing in the kitchen, and she described what he was wearing and said he just stood there for a few seconds and then he was gone. And she described my father to a T. And she had never met him because he had died before she even moved into town. And it was just the weirdest thing I've ever seen. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to make of it. But I do believe that she saw something.
Yes.
Yeah.
How could you not? Especially when she described. I believe in that.
Yeah.
Because I will piggyback on what you said. My brother would call me up and he would say, Rebecca, what's going on with Kim? Something's not right. Or what's going on with Lauren? Something, I don't know. There's something going on. I'm just calling to see how she's doing. He would never add advice. He would just say, I'm feeling something. Now, after he deceased, he showed up behind my daughter. She felt his presence. She was at her sink because when he was alive, she would go with me to his apartment and she would clean his sink. And she told me, she said, Mom, I was at my sink, and this was in her apartment after he deceased. She said, I felt this strong presence and sort of a smell of smoke, and I know it was my brother. And they can come through you through songs, familiar songs. You know, if you're thinking about them, they'll come through. I mean, I definitely believe they try to keep in touch if you're just aware. And I know that from my own personal experience as well.
It's something that has yet to be explained in our culture, and many different organizations, if you will, have tried to come up with some kind of an answer. The one that comes to mind is religion, where people say, what's life after death? And the whole idea of God and heaven and hell and eternal life, all of this. Yet no one has proved anything. But on the other hand, I hear stories like yours and the woman who rented out my father's house, and there's no explanation for it. You can't just dismiss it as some sort of, oh, she's crazy. I mean, why would she do that? Do you know what I mean? Why would she do that? She would be jeopardizing her lease. And yet,
yes, I believe in it. Go ahead.
Obviously, she did see something. And obviously, your brother had the ability to see things that other people couldn't see. So I guess my point is, through all this, to kind of wrap it up, is schizophrenia has such a negative connotation. Mm-hmm. If somebody says he's a schizophrenic, and I know in many states, if they pose a danger to themselves or to others, they can be involuntarily incarcerated, committed to a mental hospital.
Yep.
If you think about what they did with mental patients not that long ago, with electroshock treatments and all kinds of horrible things, simply because people were different. So I guess my point is that I would question the medical authorities to be careful labeling people quickly as a schizophrenic. You know, I just feel like sometimes people are given injustices by having labels of mental illness placed on them.
I agree with you 100%. And when you spoke of electroshock treatment, my mother, had 94 electroshock treatments.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I know she was gifted as well. I hope at some point that we can make a breakthrough with this. And think of all the prisoners. I guarantee you the majority of them have some type of disease, chaos going on, and they just don't know how to deal with it. And so they act out.
Now, you said your mother and father committed suicide?
Yes, they both died by suicide. Mm-hmm.
At the same time?
My mother, 1977, shortly, and then Call left shortly after that. My father, 1988.
Wow. And were they both diagnosed schizophrenic?
No, just my mother.
Just
and
your mother.
There's a lot of mental illness all in my extended family, and but my father, he had PTSD, and I do believe he had some type of depression as well. No doubt about it. And honestly, Doug, I do believe that when I approached him about the sexual abuse about me, I didn't know it at the time. He had abused my daughter, and he denied it. I think at some point that he felt like his life was not going anywhere, and he felt he was a bad person. He did leave a suicide note, and I think he just was so deep into that dark place that he could not get himself out of it, and
took his own life. Yeah,
with a gun. Yeah,
with a gun. Oh.
Yeah, in his heart. That says a lot.
He put the gun to his heart?
Yes.
Oh.
So yeah, to me that was a very profound statement.
Yeah, you don't hear that very much. Well, the book is called The Light in His Soul, Lessons from My Brother's Schizophrenia. Where can people find the book?
Amazon.
Amazon. Okay, that's easy.
Yep. And audio, Kindle, everything.
And the documentary film is called A Sister's Call. That came out in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
Where is that available?
On Amazon as well.
Okay, so you can get it on DVD?
Yep.
Super.
Certainly can.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. It was very enlightening for me because I've always been a little bit fascinated about mental illness, and I don't even like to use that term, but
I don't either.
Just about, the people that can kind of connect with the mediums is a way of describing people like that. But see, so much of that has been discounted as carnival shows. But there are people who can kind of tap into that. And I know it to be true.
Are you talking about mediums?
Well, I just said mediums, but that's, yeah. There's been so many, the occult, black magic, God, there's all kinds of terms. And most of them are they're not good terms. They're not positive terms. If anybody knows what the word is that I'm looking for, please put it in the comment section of this show, because I would be very curious to figure out what the word is that I'm looking for. Rebecca, we've got to wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so
I really
much.
appreciate
I greatly appreciate it.
Well, that's about all the time we've got for the show today. I want to thank my special guests, Carey Azzara, Rebecca Schaper, and the Comobrosband. This is Douglas Coleman saying, I'll see you when I see you.